Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Hawk Blogger. It is a Tuesday. Tuesday morning means one thing and one thing only. Mike Randle of FTN Fantasy is with us again to talk about Seahawks, fantasy football, and all other things related to the NFL. Mike, how are you doing on this fine morning?
I'm doing well, sir. And I have a message of be confident, Brian, because we're in the midst of the winds of change of the NFL. And I will never forget watching the Chiefs lose on Christmas to the Raiders when Aiden O'Connell threw one pass in the second half and said, there's no chance they're repeating. So you're in the throes of it here, but exciting stuff all around and a big couple weeks coming up for Seattle.
You know, Mike, we are wandering the desert here looking for a drop of hope. So that is, we'll take every encouraging message you want to give, because Seahawks fans are hurting right now. It wasn't just a loss, which pretty much everybody expected, including Seahawks fans, but it was a demoralizing loss where almost nothing seemed to be worth watching or pointing towards a positive direction. So I think a lot of folks are really looking to this game against the Rams this week as is there hope here? Is this team going to be serious? Because right now you're talking about a team that has lost 3 straight at home, and all 3 of them have been pretty bad games to watch, including to the Giants. And I mean, you look at the Giants actually ended up giving the Steelers a decent game last night. It started off pretty bad, but they made a game of it. So maybe that loss isn't quite as bad as it felt when I was watching the early part of that game. It was like 6-6, and I was like, oh God.
Brian, it's the nature of being a diehard fan. I had multiple Steeler fans contact me on social media last night saying, this isn't good. Classic Tomlin spot. They're running all over us. They got the win. They're 6-2. They're going to their bye. It didn't look great. It doesn't matter. All that matters to Seattle right now is you look at your division, you have 3 teams tied and the Rams right behind them. That's it. Nothing else matters. You move on to the next game. You try to get this one this week. But I've seen teams be really high and struggle and really low and come back. You're right in the middle of it. So let's get a nice victory this week, get back on the right track.
Yeah, it's interesting, that Steelers team, because as an outside observer, on one hand, you look at Mike Tomlin, you're like, man, this guy is just a paragon of winning. Like, the guy wins every single season. On the other hand, it feels like a bit of purgatory. Like, there's a ceiling on that team, and it doesn't feel like they have a great record this year. Does anybody really think that they're a contender? Like, I don't think they do. And I don't think there's a reason to believe they'll grow into becoming a contender. So it's, I don't look at the Steelers and say, gosh, I wish we were the Steelers. Even though they've got this, a much better record.
The hardest thing to do in sports is have sustained success, because even if you have sustained success, the fan base wants more. That's the nature of it. I'm of the belief that Mike Tomlin is one of the best coaches in the NFL. I understand he hasn't been to Super Bowl in the longest time. I understand they haven't won a playoff game, but year in and year out, the team is prepared and battling. And that's all you can ask for. Things will go your way eventually. You have a first-year head coach who I think is very good and I think is going to be excellent. And he's going through some growing pains right now. But that sustained success, I think other fans often just want more. I remember when Andy Reid was with the Eagles and they went to the Super Bowl. They wanted him out of Philadelphia. Can't win the big one. Couldn't win the NFC Championship game. Goes to the Super Bowl. McNabb, Terrell Owens, they still lose. They ran him out of Philadelphia. So to me, if you get those sustained wins every year, that is as good as it's going to get. You just keep at it and get the right mix and get yourself a Super Bowl.
Yeah, I think Tomlin's actually an interesting one, and something this conversation is making me want to dig a little deeper there, because it really goes to show, I mean, a lot of the things that people are criticizing the Seahawks about right now are things that I think the Steelers do well. They are consistent. They are a defensive team. They are tough. They are physical. The attention to detail is pretty good. They're not a highly penalized team. I'm not positive about that, but I don't get the impression that they're a highly penalized team. And yet you can have all of those check marks, and if you're missing the personnel, the next level blue chip personnel to get you where you want to go, you're still a pretty irrelevant team. Mm-hmm. So part of my feeling right now, Mike, is that all the things that Seahawks fans rightfully, and even the coaches are talking about that are issues with the details, with the penalties, with the self-inflicted wounds, I kind of think those are the ramblings of a losing team. You know, like you could fix all of those things. I'm not sure the Seahawks are a contending team, because it really does come down to, do you have game-changing talent that takes over games? And so that's going to be something to continue to monitor. But the Steelers are certainly an interesting kind of counterpoint to what the Seahawks have been. Let's talk about what we've got over here on FTN Fantasy, as we do every week. If folks have not already, why have you not subscribed? It's crazy. FTNfantasy.com. Use promo code HBAM. It gets you 15% off your subscription. I am a subscriber. I use it every day. I used it this morning before I got on. I used it last night before I went to bed. It gives me all the data I need for whether it's fantasy football, whether it's betting model stuff, whether it's the Discord channel so I can talk to other fans about what's going on, or people on the site, or just the Stats Hub, which is what I use the most, which is just the best insight engine out there. It's less than $8 a month if you use the promo code, and you get the FTN Plus sub. So, Mike, starting out, we always talk about what the model projections are. And for this week, the Seahawks are home against the Rams. As of right now, the Seahawks are 1.5 point favorites. Sorry, they're 1.5. Is that right? 1.5 point dogs.
Dogs, yes, 1.5 point underdogs. Rams are
they're
favored.
1.5 point underdogs. So they are 1.5 point home dogs. Talk to us about what the model currently is saying for this game.
Model says two things, and pretty strong. Remember, anything over a 5% edge is a play for us. Over 10 is an automatic play. We have a 7.6% edge on Seattle, getting 1.5. We project the Seahawks to win this game, 27.6 to 24.3, so a 3-point game. And we also think points are going to be scored, which should not be surprising, given that Seattle has their potent offense and the Rams struggle on defense and are short personnel. And the Rams now are totally healthy in offense with the return of Kupp and Nakua. We have a 6.2% edge on the over 48.5. We're projecting 51 points in this game. So we see here at FTN, Brian, Seahawk win, high scoring game.
Well, that's nice, because we haven't. I mean, the models has been pretty accurate. I don't know how's the model been doing so far this year.
It's been great, and for NBA as well. Last night, side note, my brother-in-law wanted some plays, so I sent him the model plays, and it went 5 for 5 in the model plays. So when it's season edge, the issue is it's repeating the games 100,000 times. So we're seeing where the trends are going to be. And a lot of times that's against recency bias, which is the hardest thing to get over. You just saw Seattle struggle against Buffalo. You saw the Rams look really good with their offense back. But it's the matchups, and it's the iteration, and it's the strength of both teams, and something we'll get into, adjusted DVOA fantasy points against by specific positions. That's where we get an edge, and we see it. And if it surprises you, it's probably because people look at way too much on recent events as opposed to looking at the totality and the possibilities.
Yeah, this is a game. This is a huge game for the Seahawks. We're going to dig into it more tomorrow, but I love getting to kind of open the door crack with you every Tuesday. So the model has the Seahawks winning 28-24 is the projected score. I know all Seahawks fans would take that. I think it is expected that when you see Puka Nacua back, when you see Cooper Kupp back, you see Matt Stafford throw for all those touchdowns. Sean McVay had his, great game calling against a very good, much better Vikings defense than the Seahawks defense has been. You expect the Rams to put up points. What I think people don't realize as much is the Rams defense is also not very good, and is from a DVOA perspective, the only place you can get DVOA data is on FTN Fantasy. It's the 28th ranked defense in the NFL, Mike.
Yep. And the DVOA is really critical because it can analyze how teams do against each of the positions on offense. And what we mean by that is compared to the average, how does the wide receiver one do, running back, tight end, etc. Perfect example. Last night, people in our Discord asking for advice. The biggest opportunities for the Steelers last night, they had an opportunity at wide receiver one. George Pickens did not get the touchdown. He lost 2 of them. One, his foot wasn't in. The other one was a penalty, but we saw an advantage there. And on the flip side, the Steelers struggle against wide receiver threes. Darius Slayton, right down the middle of the field, Brian, to start the game, 108 yards. So there are opportunities with DVOA where you see matchups that the coaches see also. So don't be surprised if you see this week, spoiler alert, Noah Fant getting a lot of usage early because there is an opportunity for the tight end against the Rams.
Interesting. So you talk about tight ends. I'm kind of curious. I'm looking right now for that Darius Slayton number. So wide receiver threes, is that what you were saying?
Yeah, so if you look at adjusted, and adjusted just means based on opponent. So if the Seattle plays a bunch of teams that are bad against the pass, then of course the wide receivers are going to do well. So what we do is we adjust for opponent based on how that does. And if you end up looking last night at Pittsburgh, the Steelers looking against wide receiver threes, they allow 38% more production, fantasy production, to wide receiver threes. The only teams that have been worse against wide receiver threes are Minnesota and Jacksonville this year. So coming into the game, people asked us for DFS lineups. They asked us for flex plays, etc. We said we think you should play Slayton because it's a really good matchup. He's the clear wide receiver three behind Neighbors, behind Wan'Dale Robinson, and it hit. Now, it's not a perfect science, but it hits more often than not. It's done a good job this year. So you can see where maybe the coaches and the Seahawks are going to attack the Rams and vice versa on Sunday.
I see that. I was like, I don't see Darius Slayton against the Rams, but now I understand your logic tree. So when I look at receiver games against the Rams, I see Juwan Jennings had 11 receptions in 12 targets for 175 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's a pretty good game for a wide receiver three, to your point. Marvin Harrison had 4 catches for 130 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jamison Williams had 5 catches for 121 yards and a touchdown. I think he qualifies as a wide receiver.
I think Jennings for that game, because of injuries, Brian, would actually qualify as a wide receiver too. And I think Jamison Williams qualifies as a wide receiver too, which is why it doesn't surprise me that when you look at the wide receiver twos, the Rams are their 4th worst team in the NFL at defending them. They allow 31% more production. Only teams that are worse, Jacksonville, Detroit, and New England.
Interesting. And then looking at the tight ends, as you mentioned, Brock Bowers goes for 10 catches, 93 yards. That's only, people are like, oh, they're playing better lately. Well, this was only a couple of weeks ago. Tucker Kraft, who I don't even know who that is. He has 4 catches for 88 yards and 2 touchdowns.
Yep.
And then you get back into more receivers. Jaden Reed, 4 catches for 78 yards. Interestingly, DeAndre Swift now this is obviously this is against the Bears, 7 catches for 72 yards at the running back position. Have you looked at all about how running backs have done against the Rams?
Yeah, it's a top 10 matchup for Seattle. No doubt about it. Rams have allowed 14% more fantasy production to opposing running backs. That's right below Indianapolis. That's right ahead of Miami. So they are top 10 in that area. So there are opportunities here. If you look at the Rams defense, it's very simple. Your running back should do well. Your tight end should do well, and your wide receiver 2 should have a huge advantage. They are actually really good against wide receiver 3. So it depends if DK comes back. How is the domino effect? Is that going to hurt JSN? That's the question I think you have to look at. But there are holes in this Rams defense, and I would hope the coaching staff would know exactly where to go. Like you said, love Tucker Kraft. Good guy, solid guy. When he's going for 88 yards and 2 touchdowns, that is a weakness of your defense. So there should be opportunities there this week for Seattle.
Wow, I'm just looking at this for the first time, Mike. The LA Rams, dead last, 32nd in DVOA against running backs, dead last, 32nd in DVOA against tight ends. That stands out. That certainly stands out. Not something I knew. And the only reason I know that is because I've got a subscription to FTN Fantasy. If you haven't used promo code HBAM, you should. You get a lot of these insights, and it's super cheap. So sign up now if you haven't. Looking at how some of the running backs from a rushing perspective have done, James Conner went for 122 yards. DeAndre Swift had 93 yards. Alexander Madison had 92 yards. David Montgomery had 91 yards. Jordan Mason had 77. Josh Jacobs had 73. So run defense, not so good, dude. It really does seem like, unfortunately, the Seahawks have not been able to exploit that. They certainly didn't against the Bills. Maybe this is the game that changes that.
Yeah, I think you should find success on the ground, both on the ground, in the air with the running backs. And you're going to want to do that, Brian, because obviously you don't want to turn the ball over to Kyron Williams, who's had a touchdown every single game. Only other person to do that, Derrick Henry, this year, and a fully loaded offense. Although I'll tell you, I wouldn't say Cooper Kupp looked great in that game. Nakua looked really good. Kupp
Mm-hmm.
looked okay, a little bit of a hair slow. So you want to control the ball. You don't want the turnovers. We've always talked about that. That's the key to knowing when I do a pick that there's an upset that I'm going to be in trouble, because those early turnovers are killers. But you want to keep their offense off the field. And Walker and Charbonnet should have a lot of success, which would get your offense to flow. And then you have some openings for Noah Fant. You have some openings possibly for DK. That's how you're going to win this game. Don't allow the Rams to have the ball, control the clock, and attack you through the air repeatedly. That's the key. You tell me Kenneth Walker's stat line right now, I'll tell you whether Seattle wins the game. That's how sure I am about it.
Yeah, I think that's a great call out, Mike. Last thing I'll look at here is quarterback play against the Rams. It's been pretty stellar, to be honest. 4 out of the, I guess, 7 quarterbacks that they've faced have had a passer rating over 106. Caleb Williams was on 106.6. Brock Purdy was 137.7. Sam Darnold was 128.7. Kyler Murray was a perfect 158.3. This is a team that has not picked the ball off very much. They have not taken the ball away from quarterbacks, and they have allowed a ton of passing touchdowns and a pretty decent clip of completion rate as well. So to your point early on, there's not a lot of evidence that the Rams can slow teams down from scoring. The thing that makes Rams fans, I think, encouraged right now is they look like their offense is finally ready to keep up.
Yeah, and those numbers are skewed, Brian, even if, because of course they played the Raiders and Gardner Minshew threw 3 interceptions. So those numbers are even skewed even more. Want to control the ball. You want to have long, sustainable drives. Very physical game is what you want here. And you want to get to Stafford, rough him up a little bit, and force him to make some poor decisions. You don't want him to get comfortable. And you saw when they played Detroit in game 1 what they're probably going to try to do to Seattle. Short outs, middle of the field. So that's what they want to do, to attack you that way. You get some pressure, ruffle them early, and Walker and Charbonnet get going. Noah Fant maybe with a tight end touchdown. That's going to put pressure on the Rams, who are coming off the big win over Minnesota. And I still think Cooper Kupp isn't totally healthy. There's totally a path here. If you eliminate the recency bias of what happened against Buffalo, there is a path here, and Seattle is a very live underdog against the Rams this week.
Always happy to hear that, Mike. And I agree with you about Cooper Kupp. I don't think that was injury related. I think that's age related. I think think he's cooked, but he'll look, it's very hard to throw shade any direction right now until the Seahawks start creating some sunshine in this rainy state. So anything else, Mike, that I didn't raise that you think folks should know about this week?
No, I think that's the key matchup. And remember, I know it's frustrating. You look at recency bias, but this happens all the time. Just take the last couple weeks and throw them aside. You have an elite running back. You have elite wide receiver. You have multiple weapons. You need your defensive-minded head coach to come up with a plan to get some pressure on Matthew Stafford this week. Every game is its own separate entity. We've seen it back and forth. A team looks terrible, then they look great. We can turn it around, and it can start this week.
Love it. That is Mike Randle from FTN Fantasy. Folks, if you have not already signed up over at ftnfantasy.com using promo code HBAM, you want to do it. You got the QR code on here. You can get right to it, sign up, get it for less than $8 a month. It is unbelievably detailed, all sorts of great info. I use it all the time. Mike, thank you so much for coming on, and we will see you next week.
Yes, sir. Always a pleasure.
All right, Mike Randle of FTN Fantasy. Make sure you follow him at Randle Rant. Great guy, great site, like a partner that I really love. Everyone there is great. And I've heard from a lot of folks that have signed up that they are loving having their subscription. It just makes the season a little bit more fun. So head on over to ftnfantasy.com, use promo code HBAM. All right, well, so I'm going to do, obviously, my tail of the tape. I'll write that. I will do first look tomorrow. A little bit of bonus. Ray Roberts, big Ray Roberts, he can't stay away. So instead of every other week, at least for this week, he's coming on again. So we will have him tomorrow. Looking forward to a Big Rays Rewind tomorrow. We'll do that. So it'll be a triple pod Wednesday. Wednesday night will be an earlier show. We'll probably do like a 5, maybe a 5:30 show. It'll be with Evan Hill and Jeff Simmons. So you won't want to miss that for Real Hawk Talk. Also, excited to share Friday morning with Mike Sando, we will be welcoming back Dave Bowling. So Dave Bowling and Mike Sando, those pals, will be back on with me Friday morning. Be awesome to catch up with them. So looking forward to all that. Lots of great stuff coming your way. And I had a fun conversation last night, really interesting, illuminating conversation with some season ticket holders. Held a little town hall to get some more information from people about season ticket holder experiences and ticket sales and all that kind of stuff. I've got a beast of an article I've got to work on today. I figure out how I'm going to get that all done. But I'll get that published as soon as I can. And if you haven't already heard, there was a great quote from Mike McDonald yesterday. I asked him about this. I will be asking Geno Smith about this tomorrow. So I probably won't publish my article until I get a chance to ask him about his experience and some other stuff there. So that's coming up this week. So make sure you keep an eye on hawkblogger.com for all of that. But I have got a flood of voicemails, and I really I had some other ideas for the show today, but I wanted to get to these voicemails. I will say some of these voicemails are pushing the limit of length. So we've got a couple of, couple minute long voicemails. I will ask folks to try to keep it at 60 seconds or less as a max. 30 seconds is ideal. So as you record these voicemails on your phone, on the voice memo app, do your best to limit it to 30 seconds or less, a minute at most. I'm going to play these today because they're good calls. And look, this is a time, folks, where, we've got to link elbows, shoulder to shoulder, back to back, circle the wagons, whatever you want to say. It's rough. It is a rough time right now. So I wanted to give people a chance to share what's on their mind, get what's on their chest, off their chest, and share it with all of you. So I thought there were some good calls here. And that means one thing and one thing only. It's time for voicemails.
Time to rise and shine, it's clear. HB Mornings voicemails here. Lay and laugh, let go of fear. Start your day with cheer, my dear.
Listen, everyone needs to chill out.
All right, first voicemail comes from Matt. And here's what Matt has to say about what he's experiencing so far.
Listen, everyone needs to chill out. I remember Chuck Knox. We used to call him Choke Knox. John O. Williams was my favorite player. Then we got Flores. He was supposed to be the savior, and he was terrible. And then we had Erickson, and the Blades and all that. And then we got Holmgren, and he built us our stadium. And Matt Hasselbeck figured it out. And then we had the Jim Mora era, which was terrible, okay? And then we got some crazy guy named Pete, and he won me over. Let me tell you what, I like Mike. Give him some time. He's going to figure it out. I've seen the worst of the Hawks, and I've seen the best. We've been a little bit spoiled. So just give Mike his time. I like Mike.
All right, that was Matt, and I actually didn't remember the Choke Knox nickname. I mean, I was a fan back in the kind of mid 80s through, obviously, since then. I remember Ground Chuck, but I remember Flores coming in. I don't remember him being considered a savior, but there was a lot of, hope anytime you get a new coach. I think that Dennis Erickson's a good call, younger college coach that came back to Seattle area after being in Washington State and then going, I think, to Miami. And there was hope this guy was like a national champion kind of coach, or esque coach. And you were hoping that he could bring that. I actually really enjoyed the Dennis Erickson era, even though it was not as successful as he or anyone else would have wanted. And then, yeah, I think it's fair to bring up the Jim Mora era. That was a pretty disastrous. He was the only 1-year head coach in Seahawks franchise history. It's very rare to have a 1-year coach, but that team really gave up on the coach. The last few games of the season, they just didn't play. And I don't think there's a chance Mike Macdonald can be a 1-year head coach. I think they're going to give him a chance to figure this out and get his players in there and get everything adjusted. So I don't think he's going to be a 1-year head coach. That said, the way that the players have responded in terms of the defense especially has been concerning. And that game against the Bills felt a little bit like a 2009 game for the Seahawks. It was not good. So, no more of that, please. As a huge fan of Mike Macdonald, huge fan of the Seahawks, I don't want any more of that. All right. Next, this voicemail comes from...
Hey, Brian. This is Greg from Vancouver,
Greg.
Washington, but I'm currently in Texas. I know you're coming out with a new article regarding fan attendance to games, but I just can't help myself but to speak on the topic now. I'm a new fan to the Seahawks. I've always rooted for them when I would occasionally watch their games in the past, but I never really became a fanatic until the 2022 season after Russ left. I was fresh into college, and my roommate told me that the Hawks wouldn't win more than 5 games that season. I told him to bet on it, and we did. Because of that, I got really involved every week rooting for the Hawks. Since then, I've become an even bigger fan, and yet I'm really disappointed when I look around at the rest of the fandom. Is every fan base this toxic? I see people calling for Geno to get benched every week, as if he's the sole arbiter for every loss. There are dedicated accounts active in this fan base just to hate on Geno, saying Howell should be the quarterback 1. Others saying Mike Macdonald was a terrible hire because of these performances. Yet I've seen just as bad as performances from this team in the last 2 years too, with Pete Carroll. Also, we're 500 right now, but it seems as though we have won maybe 2 games with how people are acting. Maybe my standards are too low for this team, but it is hard for me to hate on this team when they were projected 5 wins 2 years ago and I see the pieces gathering together. My friends in college are fans of other teams that suck, but they always root for and defend them. Yet anytime I see the Seahawks make a post on Instagram or other platforms, the comments are always negative. It seems to me that the 12s were never fans until 2012 and are actually just fake. That's the perspective I got from others outside of our fandom. It disgusted me to see the amount of Steelers fans last year and 49ers and Bills fans this year in our stadium. I would love to go to the Seahawks games. In fact, I went to the game in Dallas last year because my college is in Texas. Essentially, my question is, how can our fan base become as loyal as, let's say, the Steelers fan base, who came in and took over our stadium with a middling team and Mason Rudolph at quarterback? Is the problem Geno? Because I don't see how you can't root for that guy. If not, then what is the issue?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's certainly something that's on my mind. I think it's hard for me to say and speak on this with any confidence how similar or different the Seahawks fan base is from any other fan base. I'm not a national reporter covering a bunch of different teams. I don't interact with the other fan bases as much. So that's a little hard for me to speak on with any confidence. I will say that Seahawks fans have become, a little bit more... what's the right word? I think there's a little more division among the fan base. And I certainly think that, like, for me, the height of that was the Let Russ Cook era, where there was very clear division between Pete Carroll supporters and Russell Wilson supporters. And you had people that were declarative about, I'm a Russell Wilson fan, I'm not a Seahawks fan, and they were very proud of it, and they promote Russ, and they would promote Russ at the expense of Pete Carroll, at the expense of John Schneider. And you had an an agent who was pretty active and sowing seeds of discontent that way. And that was my least favorite time, to be honest, as a Seahawks fan. It really divided the fan base, and it felt like civil war. And so I don't think we're in that situation right now, but we're in this kind of echo of that situation, which is the Pete Carroll era, the LOB era, had this effect on people where, one, it was the most successful era in franchise history. Anytime you have a successful era, you are going to gain fans and people are going to pay attention. And a lot of people, that's the first time they're going to become fans. And people call it bandwagoning, and that's fine. But every single fan becomes a fan of a team for the first time at some point. And I would wager that the vast majority of those people became fans during a very positive year for that team. It's not often that someone gets really attracted to a team when they're playing poorly. I happened to become a Seahawks fan when I was super young because I loved the colors. My favorite colors were blue and green. They were blue and green. That was my favorite team. Like, it was pretty simple. But for most people, even when I did my town hall last night, the amount of folks on that call that got their season tickets, the 2005 season, was significant, right? Like, that was the first Super Bowl run, and people came aboard then. There are people that started when Lumen Field opened for the first time. But I guess my point being that if you came into the fandom in that era, 2012, nothing's come close to it, and nothing may ever come close to it. That might be the best team in franchise history forever. Like, it was that good of a team. And I think to some extent, people are going to come to grips with that. I also think that the transition, it's really hard to follow a legend. People will always tell you that, like, don't be the guy that follows the guy or the gal that follows the gal, whatever it is. And Mike Macdonald is the guy following the most popular, the most successful coach in franchise history. Geno Smith is the guy following the most popular, most successful quarterback in franchise history. And they aren't those guys. And they certainly haven't had the success of those guys to make anyone forget about them. So until they start winning, until they like create new memories, there's going to be a group of people that are just not bought in. And I get it. I think it's an understandable perspective to have. So the only other thing I'll say, because this gets me all the way back into the article I'm going to be writing, and I got a lot to say on this subject, but I mean, look, the Bills and the 49ers, they happen to be two franchises that are in their peak moments in terms of Super Bowl contention. When the 49ers were one of the worst teams in the NFL for a large chunk of the last decade, their fans were not taking over Lumen Field. I mean, they are the most front-runnery fan base around. So, I mean, they call themselves the Faithful, and I've got dozens of pictures of their stadium just empty, like during home games, because people are just apathetic about that team unless they're the best. They're very much a front-runner fan base. So Pittsburgh's a different one. That's an old franchise. Generations of fans have been following that. And the thing that I would just point out there, and this is going to come up in the article as well, is that when you are a transplant in Seattle, or you're a fan of a team that doesn't often come to Seattle, your one chance to go to Seattle or to see your team play, if you're a transplant here, is when those guys come. And so it ends up creating a little bit of a higher willingness to pay for those. Like, the Bills have been to Lumen Field, I think, twice in 20 years or something like that. It's it's very rare. So Bills fans are like circling that. The same way I probably circle New Orleans. I'm like, I can't wait to go back to New Orleans and watch a game. Or I want to go back to Green Bay. So I think that's just part of the deal. But thank you for that voicemail. Next one. Let's hear from John.
Hey Brian, it's John here. Firstly, I just wanted to shout out the Real Hawk Talk and Hawk Blogger morning shows. I found you guys about 2 years ago, and you have quickly become my go-to when it comes to Seahawks content. I really took a lot away from the post-game show with you, Evan, and Jeff after this Bills game. But what stood out the most is when you guys talked about what it means to these players to be a Seahawk. And on top of that, just the overall heart of this team. I've been a Seahawks fan for almost 15 years, and I've never seen anything like this. This team has zero identity, zero heart or toughness of any kind. No soul even. Players are hanging their head on the sideline, visibly sulking, and displaying what I would call extremely poor body language after and between plays, and now even fighting with each other on the sideline. I believe that struggling to find an identity when you have an entirely new coaching staff isn't uncommon, but because of this, we need to have multiple players that step up and lead this team through these growing pains. Who's doing that for this team? So far, it's been a lot of the players who I thought would actually take on this role that are the most guilty of this lack of mental toughness. Gino especially. Gino can lead a team. Gino can raise the spirits of players around him. I honestly believe that, but I cannot wrap my head around why he or any of these guys cannot rally the troops to show up for a game and fight for a win, regardless of if we end up getting one or not. I honestly did not expect to beat the Bills on Sunday, but man, we did not show up in any way, shape, or form, and someone's got to bring these guys to life. Thanks for listening, and keep up the good work on the pod.
Yeah, I understand that sentiment, and I think it's fair to say Gino has not stepped up as the clear leader. I don't think it's him in particular, and I think some people do, but I don't. I look at Gino and I empathize with that guy. I empathize with what the narrative is about him to begin with. And then to come into a situation that he has never played behind a good offensive line here. He hasn't played behind a mediocre offensive line here. And so he's trying to not only change the narrative about who he is and as a quarterback, but do it behind a line that's not helping, a running game that's non-existent. And so on one hand, I think it just takes a lot of energy to not just be like, man, are you seeing what I'm seeing? Like, this is ridiculous what I'm trying to pull off here. And so I think he's done a very good job of not pointing fingers. So I give him a lot of credit for that on the leadership front. And I think that he's also done a really good job of saying, hey, that's on me. Like, I can't throw that interception, even though it was DK running the wrong route or whatever other things. I think he's done that. And I think that he has been maybe the only player, maybe Leonard Williams and him are the only players where I can point to on field where it's like they said, you know what, guys, jump on my back. The Detroit game, great example. The New England game, great example. Where Gino said, like, I'm going to carry you guys. We'll figure it out. I know the defense isn't playing their best. They're not doing their jobs as well. I'm going to carry us. And so that is leadership to me. That is calm under pressure. The fact that he has brought the team, had the most game-winning drives last year. Like, these are moments where I think that he demonstrates his leadership. And so leadership doesn't have to show up in all the same ways for the same people. We heard from Ray Roberts last week that when, he's been a captain on every team he's been on, and Barry Sanders was a captain it was certainly a leader in Detroit, but he was not vocal. And so he would tell Ray what he wanted people to hear, and Ray would tell him. So I'm not saying Gino's like Barry Sanders that way, but I'm just saying there's different ways to lead. The most important thing here, and something that I didn't know until I followed teams more closely, is that while fans like the kind of vocal leader, whether it's a coach or a player that says the right things and acts the right way, what players respond to is excellence on the field. And if somebody's a dog on the field, if they just annihilate people with a big hit, or they make a big play, or they run somebody over, if they are better, they do things that like, wow, other professional athletes, their teammates, those are the guys that end up being looked to by people in the locker room. That's the people that they admire. So you can say all the great things you want, but if you're not on the field doing great things, you're not really going to be able to really show up as a leader. And so that's my biggest concern right now is we don't have guys that are really showing up on the field as doing special things. We just don't have a lot of guys doing that. And the season started with some examples of that, but really right now, we're at a really low point in terms of how many people are doing that. All right, next voicemail.
Hey, Hawk Blogger. I'll stay anonymous here. I just want to air out some concerns I have over the sideline and the coaching change kind of as a whole. You know, I got a lot of faith in Mike. I think he'll turn it around, but at the same time, I'm starting to miss Pete a little. You know, from my perspective, I'm a hockey guy up here in Canada, and I've played on teams with a calm bench, and I've played on teams with a loud bench. And, you know, a loud bench, you got guys complaining about the refs and, you know, kind of scoffing when somebody turns the puck over or the goalie lets in a soft one. And just bad body language in general. And, you know, when you're playing in that environment, it's kind of stressful, and you start to grip the stick a little too tight. Especially in, like, hockey, you need to play freer because the puck moves so fast. You can't just drop plays. Like, you can't drop a pick and roll all the time. You gotta be able to react and play free, and it's best when you're not in that stressful environment. So obviously, you know, hockey culture, football culture, it's different, but I don't know. I just worry, like, when I look at this sideline, there, you know, I'm not on the sideline. There might be guys getting the tablets out, talking about what they want to do on the next drive, how they're going to rush the passer, what the O-line on the other team's doing. But it seems like every time the broadcast camera pans over to the Seahawks sideline, there's some bad body language. And, you know, you kind of expect DK to pout, but there's some pouting from some other guys. There's guys with their heads down. There's guys just watching. There's Geno Smith not having the best body language, in my opinion. I don't like him throwing the football at players on the other team. And overall, I'm just kind of worried. And I definitely like Pete because he's the antithesis of letting players play free. And I'm kind of worried that's gone. Anyway, interested to hear your thoughts. Thanks.
Yeah, interesting to hear, you know, the hockey analogy there. And, you know, this is just the state of things when you're losing. I mean, of course, you're going to pay attention to these things. And I even see something in chat that I think someone's saying it's weird to see Brian making excuses for Geno's body language, even though he's so critical of Kyler's. I don't think I made any excuses for Geno's body language. I think I just was giving examples of where he has stepped up in ways that I think are positive. I certainly I think I started by saying that Geno Smith has not stepped up as a leader the way that you'd hope he would. So I don't think I'm making any excuses there. I think that what I've said and what people are responding to in these voicemails and kind of echoing is there is just a lack of anybody, whether it's coaches, players, offense, defense, who are capable of the on-field performance necessary and the off-field leadership necessary to stop free falls when they happen. When a tailspin starts in the games, they have not been able to pull out of it defensively, especially. At least you can say the offense has had situations in almost every game where they respond to adversity and they do come back and make a play, bring you back into the game. The Bills game's not a great example, although you could say without the mistakes in the first half, they did crawl back into that game in the first half. That was a great drive early on to get them down into scoring range before all that blew up. So the second half was hard to forget, though. I mean, the second half was just atrocious, and they just lost all will. So, yeah, this is an issue. And I think if you're not concerned, congratulations, because that would be a nice place to be if I could just look at this and feel like, oh, yeah, things are going the right direction or they'll be fine. there's a lot of signs pointing to it's not going to be fine. That's what, like right now, if you're paying attention, they've not been able to address the problems that have been recurring problems on this team. And there's been a number of weeks to try to do it. And so that's a big deal. Then you've got, number of games where the defense just completely loses the grip on the game and never gets it back. That's not good. And you've got these kind of bickering things that have been happening. And there's a lot of things that are not good right now. And when you're getting the coach consistently asked, what do you do well? What is something you guys do well? And he's having to answer that question. That's not a good sign. Let's just be honest. So I know folks in general, just to protect your souls and your mental health, are like, okay, let's focus on the positive. And that's generally how I am as well. I think it's also important to kind of acknowledge reality. And the reality is the Seahawks aren't close right now to being a good team. Regardless of their record, regardless of whether they've won some games, regardless of whether there's been some good plays here and there, regardless of whether they've got some really interesting young talent, right now it's like code red. It's really bad. That game was that bad. If it had been its own thing, if just that game had happened by itself, then you could say, all right, look, bad week, something just went wrong. But in the context of the last month, the last 5 weeks, is really a concern. So I think what we're going to have to see is I really, really, really believe coaches can't fix this. And people are going to take that as me defending Mike. I just told you, nobody's doing their job well. So I'm not defending Mike. I'm just telling you that the way through what we're seeing is not going to come from a coach coming in and telling you how to do something better. I don't believe that. I think it's got to come from the players. And so one thing that, Pete did is he told Cam Chancellor, you got to be a leader. You were quiet as a rookie. He was quiet as a rookie. And he's like, you got to speak up. People will listen. So Mike might have to be encouraging of somebody, maybe it is a Devin Witherspoon that he needs to get to be more of a leader, one of the younger players. Maybe it is whoever else. And maybe this is a painful one, but maybe it's not this year. Maybe that person does not emerge this year. Maybe that person is forged this year by this experience and they realize, my God, I don't want to do that anymore. I'm not going to accept that anymore. And we're going to do things different next year. Maybe that's how it happens. But I really hope that some players in that locker room have a players only meeting, really, really own their shit, and that they start making a difference. Because I'll give you an example of prime LOB, prime Pete Carroll, Russell Wilson, all that happened, 2015. That Seahawks 2015 squad was struggling. And like I said, they had all the talent you could want, all the leadership you could want. They had the coach. They had everything you want. And yet they went into they went in and lost to Arizona at home and were 4-5 that year. And then there was a players only meeting. This was after the bye week. So it was you come out of the bye week and you're excited and you think things are going to change and you lose at home to the Cardinals. You give up 39 points and 451 yards to the Cardinals that year. Okay? And they had a players only meeting and they turned it around and they ended up still finishing as the number one defense in the NFL that year for the fourth straight year. they won. So they were 4-5. They won 6 of their last 7 games. So I'll just say, like, it takes players. It takes players to step forward in these situations more than I think it takes coaches. That's why I think people are maybe missing that a little bit. All right. We've got Drew B has gifted 10 Hawk Blogger memberships. Thank you so much, Drew. Really appreciate the generosity, even during down times. Love seeing that. And if you get one of these free memberships, pay it forward. Consider giving one, or just, re-upping. Sign up for your second month as well. All right, we got another voicemail, and I think this one everyone's going to love. This is from Old School. Here we go.
What up, 12s? Old School Seahawk here. It has become clear to me that I must weigh in on the most pressing topic for our community. There are certainly lots of things to choose from. Do we extend Geno? Do we trade DK Metcalf? Do we fire Mike McDonald? Do we fire Ryan Grubb? Do we fire John Snyder? It's none of the above. I am, of course, referring to the voicemail theme song. For me personally, that intro is no bueno. The bitter irony here, of course, is the fact that by leaving a voicemail, I am only perpetuating its continued use. It does, however, illustrate 2 key points for me. Number 1, there's a symbiotic relationship here. Brian revels in the fact that most people hate the jingle. Therefore, the best way for me to give Brian joy is to continue to hate on that song, so that's what I'm going to do. Second, Brian and I don't have to agree. It will always be respectful, but of course, we can disagree without being disagreeable. So thank you, Brian, for challenging my assumptions and doing it in a way where you dive deep, gather data, analyze that, and then bring it forward. Also, you show strength and character by admitting when, maybe you've made a mistake. And lastly, I'm going to go off the board here from football. Oftentimes, my wife and I struggle to find things that we can watch together. The last thing that we finished was actually the latest season of Taskmaster. And for whoever's maybe not familiar with that, it's a British show. I'll use air quotes when I call it a game show. It's really a comedy series. You can find it on YouTube, but it's excellent. So that's my suggestion for anybody who hasn't heard it. But Brian, do you have any suggestions for what me and my wife might be able to watch? Keep your head up, 12s. Let's go, Seahawks.
Thank you, Old School, for your voicemail. And I do enjoy that everyone hates the jingle. It was fun to make, and it makes me laugh. So it's going to stay. It's going to stick around and torture people for as long as I can make it happen. And I think, one of the things I like about your voicemail there is, God, it's becoming a lost art to be able to disagree respectfully and kindly. Like, my goodness. Like, I grew up in a household where we would have a lot of debates and a lot of fights, and we would never walk away until we get it resolved. And so I'm generally pretty comfortable in conflict, but oh man, there's so much conflict right now. Like, let's just have a friendly conversation and a debate for the sake of having a debate and have different feelings. But yeah, the other piece that I will offer, so you asked about shows. Since I don't know you and your wife, it's hard for me to say what you guys would like. I will tell you the show that I've loved recently, and I have no idea if it would be a good match for you guys. I watched the show Hysteria on Peacock, and okay, I love Stranger Things. Like, Stranger Things is one of my favorite shows. And I loved Army of Darkness, Evil Dead 2, like one of my favorite movie series. And Hysteria is kind of this, it's this, if Stranger Things met The Exorcist, is kind of how I would describe it. And it's got Bruce Campbell, who's from Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness, who I love. It's got a lot of, like, it's got one of the actresses from Pitch Perfect, if you've watched any of that movie. It's set in the 80s, so it's got like 80s vibes to it, and there's some unexpected aspects of it. So I really enjoyed it. I will say, I don't want to spoil anything. I didn't love the finale, but I really loved I binged that series. So if you haven't watched Hysteria on Peacock, I personally, like, you have to watch the whole first episode because it's not exactly what you think until you get to the end and you're like, whoa, what just happened? So that's one that I would recommend. All right, folks, there's been some lively discussion in chat today. Hopefully everybody was kind to one another, even if you have differences of opinion. Appreciate everyone that sent in a voicemail. I will not always have this many voicemails, or I will not always play them, but feel free to record your voicemail using your voice memo app on your phone. Attach it to an email, send it to me at brian@hawkblogger.com, and if I have a chance, I will play it. So appreciate all of you. Let's turn our attention to this Rams game. My God, do we need them to win this game? I'm not talking, there's no moral victories. I don't want them to play well. I want them to win. That is, they got to win this game heading into the bye week. Let's hope they find a way to get that done. That would be the only thing that I would consider encouraging at this point. I will start looking into this Rams team a little bit more, and we'll get you tail the tape probably later tonight, maybe first thing tomorrow. And then we are going to get into Big Ray Roberts with Big Ray's Rewind tomorrow. And as I said, Dave Bowling and Mike Sando on Friday. So a lot of good stuff coming your way. If you haven't signed up at patreon.com/hawkblogger, now's the time to do it. Gets you all of these episodes in audio, no ads, nothing, all equalized audio-wise. So head on over there. You can get Slack access to have the conversation with other Seahawks fans there as well. All right, folks. That will do it. This has been episode 219 of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Hawk Blogger. Take care. Have a great rest of your day.